Get that mutt off the field. Now it's not your damn petting zoo, Garcia. Coach Mallory's voice tore across the rusted bleachers like a whip. His clipboard slammed against his thigh, but nobody moved. Not the janitor sweeping leaves near the gym doors. Not the substitute PE teacher tightening the padlock on the gate. And certainly not the dog. She was older than dirt. One ear wilted sideways, her coat the color of rain-washed brick. A faded green tag dangled from her collar like a memory. She lay at the center of the cracked basketball court, head low between her front paws, tail still. She didn't flinch when the wind rattled the loose tin above the bleachers or when the custodian's broom clacked too close. She was waiting, not resting, not wandering. Waiting. Garcia took a slow breath, eyes narrowing. Behind her thick glasses, "She's not hurting anyone," she muttered. Too quiet for Mallory to hear, or maybe loud enough for him to pretend not to. "She's been here 3 days," he barked, turning his fury toward her now. "You know what that means? That's a liability. If someone trips, or she bites a kid, it's on us. This place is already under review for closure." "I'm not about to. She doesn't even move," Garcia said gently. That was true. The dog hadn't budged since the district announced the school's permanent shutdown. As if the moment the chain had wrapped around the main gate, she'd laid down her own protest, one that came without sound or sign, just presence. The kids were gone. The classrooms silent. Weeds had already started pushing up through the soccer field, and the library windows wore a film of dust thick as old regret. But the dog stayed. From sunrise to sunset, always in the same spot, always facing the gym. Garcia, who had spent 15 years behind the front desk of Foxridge Middle, knew the signs of a place giving up. But this dog wasn't done. Yet they tried shooing her, clapping, honking from the maintenance cart. Even Mallory's mean-eyed German shepherd, Diesel, had been led past the court once, and instead of reacting, the old dog simply lifted her head, gave him a slow blink, and laid it back down. Diesel had growled once, unsure, then followed Mallory away with a puzzled snort. By the 4th day, the dog still hadn't eaten anything, but she drank from a cracked plastic bowl. Garcia left quietly beside her on the 2nd evening, near the vending machine that hadn't worked since February. What was she guarding, or waiting for? That morning, something shifted. The janitor, Miguel, usually tight-lipped and allergic to stories, stood a few minutes longer near the edge of the court. Garcia caught him staring. When she approached, he didn't look away. "Remember that kid, right?" he asked, voice low. "Number dozy locker room accident 5 years ago." Garcia nodded slowly, the chill passing through her arms before she could reply. Everyone remembered Isaac Delano, the track team's quietest runner, slipped on the wet tile after practice. Head injury, died 3 days later. The locker room was sealed for renovations that never happened. The door rusted shut, and no one spoke of it anymore. "She was his dog," Miguel said, eyes still on the animal. Garcia looked at the faded collar tag again, her breath catching in her chest. The green circle was worn, but the name pressed into it was still visible if as QUINTED. Tessie. Isaac used to bring her in after school. She'd wait outside the gym doors until practice ended. Garcia remembered the way he'd talked to her like she was a person, as if Tessie understood every single word. Maybe she did. "She's been gone since the funeral," Miguel added. "Nobody ever found her." And now the bell above the old cafeteria door let out a single weak ding. Wind, probably, or maybe a draft. But it made them both flinch. That afternoon, when the sky darkened early with a wall of gray storm clouds, Tessie stood up. For the first time in 5 days, she moved, one paw, then another. Her joints shook. She didn't bark, didn't run, just walked slowly, painfully, toward the rusted locker room. Garcia followed, uncertain whether she was trembling from the cold or from something deeper. The janitor pulled the keys from his belt. "We can't open that," he said under his breath. "It's sealed. Nobody's been inside since the dog sat in front of it and waited." Another gust of wind. This time, colder. It carried the faintest smell of old gym socks, mildew, and something else. Something metallic. Garcia took the key. Her hand hesitated at the lock. Her breath fogged the metal. Mallory was gone for the day. Nobody was watching. And the dog hadn't left. When the lock turned with a reluctant clunk, the door gave an angry groan. The smell hit first. Damp, forgotten years, rust and silence. The dog didn't wait. She slipped inside, her tail low, steps slow but sure, inside. The light from the doorway cast long shadows across the benches and half-open lockers. The silence pressed against Garcia's ears. Then Tessie stopped in front of one locker. Number 12. She sat, stared at it, and whimpered once. Just once. Garcia stepped closer, not breathing. The locker door wasn't fully closed, and tucked inside, barely visible in the dim light, was a shoebox. One corner slightly torn, a folded paper resting on top. Garcia reached for it. Slowly the air felt heavier here, and outside the storm finally broke, thunder cracking like grief. But Tessie didn't flinch. She had waited long enough. Garcia didn't speak at first. Her fingers hovered over the edge of the box, as if touching it might undo something sacred. The air inside the locker room was still, but not dead. It felt like a place paused, as though time itself had taken a breath and never exhaled. Tessie didn't move either. She just sat there, watching. Her eyes weren't pleading, but they held something deeper. Not fear, not urgency. Something quieter, expectation. The folded paper on top of the box was brittle at the edges. Garcia slid it free, unfolding it slowly, the way you'd turn the page of a book you weren't sure you had permission to read. It was a handwritten note, the kind a teacher might scribble in the margin of a yearbook. But it wasn't addressed to a person. It was a list. Things I'll tell her after regionals. She's getting slower, but I don't care. She still barks at the microwave, not giving up hope. I wish I could bring her into the gym with me sometimes. I think she understands when I cry. There were a few more lines, messier, darker, almost as if they'd been written in a rush. If I win, I'll take her picture and hang it in the locker. Promise. The bottom of the page had a smear, not quite ink, not quite dirt, maybe just time. Garcia stood there, the words swimming in her mind. Outside, the rain fell harder. Thunder moved farther away now, like something passing rather than arriving. She looked at Tessie again. The old dog's gaze hadn't shifted from locker number 12. Her body trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady, waiting still, or remembering. Inside the box, beneath the note, were a pair of worn-out track shoes, laces still knotted, a laminated ribbon, second place from the regionals, and a Polaroid. Garcia turned it over. The edges had curled, and one corner was burnt like it had touched a candle. The image was faded, but clear enough. Isaac, crouched beside Tessie on the same court she'd now claimed as her vigil. His arm looped around her neck. She was younger then, alert, bright-eyed. His smile was small, like he hadn't quite figured out how to show it yet. In the corner, written in blue pen, the words, "Next time gold, with you." Garcia didn't realize she was crying until she blinked, and the tears hit the photo. She wiped them quickly, like someone might walk in and catch her mid-confession. Behind her, the locker room light flickered once, not ominously, just tired. When she heard it, a scrape soft like claws against tile. Tessie had stood up again, but this time she didn't go back to the court. She turned and walked deeper into the locker room. Garcia hesitated. For a moment, every rational part of her said it was enough. The box, the photo, the mystery, it was all memory now, better left in the past. But another part of her, the part that had stayed behind when the last bell rang and the doors closed for good, followed. They passed the cracked mirrors, the old trophy case, the rusted shower stalls. Tessie stopped only once, sniffing at a gap in the wall where the plaster had split years ago from moisture. Her ears flicked. Then she kept moving, heading straight for the back room. The old equipment storage. Garcia had been there once before, years ago. It was always locked, mostly used for overstocked mats, broken hurdles, extra uniforms. But when she reached the door, it was already open. The air inside was cooler. There was no window, just a soft glow from the hallway spilling across the dust-covered floor. Tessie stood near the far wall, nose low, pawing gently at the ground. Then she lay down, not in protest, not in vigil. It looked like relief. Garcia stepped inside and saw it. Beneath the wall panel, partially buried in dust and a few loose floor tiles, was another shoebox, older, water-stained, but on top of it was something impossible. Student ID card. Isaac Delano, grade 8. It was strange, the photo wasn't one she recognized. He looked younger, maybe 6th grade, and unlike most school ID pictures, he was smiling, a full smile. Tessie must have known it was here, or remembered him placing it there. Somehow, someway. Garcia sank to the floor slowly, heart thudding in her chest. She didn't know if it was grief, or the strange feeling that maybe she wasn't supposed to be the one finding this. Tessie rested her head on the box, and closed her eyes, not in pain, in sadness, but as if something had ended, and she could finally allow herself to rest. 4 minutes, maybe more. Garcia didn't move. The storm outside faded into silence, and the wind curled around the cracks in the gym like a final sigh. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, before sunrise, Tessie was gone. Not dead, just gone. The locker room had been empty, the equipment room undisturbed. But the box, the first one, sat on Garcia's desk in the front office, and the photo of Isaac and Tessie, it now hung inside locker number 12, taped neatly against the back wall. Just as he'd promised. The shoebox was lighter than it should have been. Garcia cradled it with both hands, stepping back into the light spilling from the open door. The storm outside had turned the court into a silver mirror, rain drumming against the tin roof, puddles forming in the cracks of the faded paint. Tessie remained where she was, still in front of locker 12, her head low, tail resting on the cold tile, like she'd finally reached the end of something only she could see. Garcia glanced down. The paper folded on top of the box was yellowed and fragile, but it hadn't been there 5 years ago. She was sure of it. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. One line, handwritten in ink that had bled just enough to soften the edges, but not enough to erase the words. For when she comes back. Isaac. The air caught in Garcia's lungs. She looked down at the dog again, whose cloudy eyes were fixed not on her, but on the box, or maybe on something long past it. Miguel stood just outside the doorway now, his arms crossed, soaked to the elbows. "What is it?" he asked, quieter than before. Garcia opened the lid. Inside a small, rolled photograph, a fraying tennis ball, and a tiny metal tag shaped like a lightning bolt, the kind you'd find on a child's key. Beneath them, tucked in neatly, was a sealed envelope with her own name written on it, Mrs. Garcia. She sat down on the nearest bench, the box in her lap, the rain pounding behind her like distant applause or distant war. She couldn't decide. Which dot she opened the envelope. The letter inside was written in Isaac's handwriting, slanted, precise, like the way he'd fill out science lab forms, even though he always hated the subject. "Hi, if you're reading this, I guess I'm not around anymore. That sucks. But you always told me to write things down when my head felt like soup. So, I did. I put it all here. You said words could hold things in place when people couldn't. I hope that's true. If you find Tessie, tell her I didn't. Forget I just ran out of time. I tried to keep her away that day. I locked her in the garage. I thought it'd be safer. I didn't want her to see, but she chewed through the side panel. I don't even know how. She followed me all the way to school. If she comes back, it means she never gave up. And if you're here too, maybe you didn't either. Thanks for always noticing me when no one else did." By the time she finished reading, Garcia's throat felt full of gravel. She didn't cry, not the way people expect, but something inside her shifted, as if a rusted hinge finally gave way. When she looked up, Tessie had moved. She was now sitting beside her, eyes on the letter, as if she too remembered the words, as if she'd memorized them from the shape of Isaac's voice. Garcia reached down and touched her head. The fur was coarse and damp but warm. The door behind them groaned again. Miguel stepped in fully now, his boots leaving wet marks on the tile. "We should call someone," he said softly. "Animal control, maybe. She's too old to be on her own." But Garcia shook her head. Not yet. She didn't know why, exactly. Only that the moment didn't belong to paperwork or procedures. It belonged to memory. Two unfinished things. And something still felt unfinished. A flash of light in the corner of the locker room caught her eye. She turned just above the showers, where the wall met the ceiling. A loose ventilation grate had shifted open. The angle was strange. She walked toward it. There was something lodged just inside the duct. A strip of fabric, dark red, and tightly twisted. Miguel raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She reached up, pulled it free. It was a lanyard. The name badge attached to it had warped with time and heat, but the photo on it was still clear. It wasn't Isaac, it was Coach Mallory, a younger version, no clipboard, just a whistle and a smile. That didn't quite reach his eyes. Garcia stared at it. A strange coldness settled into her spine. Why was his badge hidden in the duct? Why here? She turned to Miguel, her voice quiet. "This doesn't make sense." "No, it doesn't." The dog stood again, her legs shaky, her gaze now on the far end of the room toward the storage closet where Mallory used to keep old gear and extra supplies. Garcia followed Tessie's line of sight. The closet door was closed, but not locked. A faint smell leaked from beneath. Must, and something more metallic. Familiar. Wrong. Garcia took a slow step forward. Behind her, Tessie let out a low, mournful whine, and somewhere deep in her chest, Garcia knew the dog hadn't been waiting for Isaac to return. She had been waiting for someone to notice the shoebox was heavier than it looked. Garcia held it like a relic, her fingers trembling beneath the soft weight of memory. The locker room, cold and breathless, had swallowed every sound except for Tessie's slow breathing. The old dog sat perfectly still, eyes fixed not on the box but on Garcia, as if waiting for her to understand something she hadn't yet dared to consider. The paper on top had yellowed slightly at the edges. Garcia unfolded it with care, expecting some scribbled note or forgotten homework. But it wasn't either. It was a drawing. Childish, messy, and achingly familiar. A stick figure stood smiling beside a dog with lopsided ears. Above them, in thick blue crayon, the words, "Me and Tessie forever," were scrawled with the stubborn confidence of a 12-year-old boy who didn't yet believe in endings. Garcia felt something shift deep in her chest. She glanced at Tessie. The dog hadn't moved. Inside the box were more papers, some school assignments, a cracked friendship bracelet, a photo ID badge, and at the very bottom, a red whistle on a frayed string. Coach Mallory's old track whistle. Garcia stared at it. This wasn't just a locker someone had forgotten to clean out. It was a time capsule, an altar, and someone had come back for it. But who? A sudden knock behind her made Garcia flinch hard, enough to drop the whistle. It hit the floor with a metallic clatter that echoed like a scream in the empty locker room. She turned, heart pounding, and saw Miguel standing in the doorway, eyes wide. "You need to come outside," he said, voice low now. She tucked the paper back inside the box, one hand still over the drawing, and followed him into the stormlit afternoon. The rain had paused for now, but clouds hung low and swollen, casting the campus in a flat, ghostly gray. Tessie was no longer behind her. The dog had returned to the court, and she wasn't alone. A boy stood near the edge of the gym wall, maybe 15, maybe 16, dressed in a soaked hoodie, his face pale and unreadable. His hands hung at his sides, but his eyes never left Tessie. Garcia froze. Miguel said nothing. The boy took a hesitant step forward. Tessie looked up. Her body wavered slightly, as if caught between exhaustion and something deeper recognition. Then, the boy spoke. She came back. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it rang through Garcia like a thunderclap. Garcia stepped closer, trying to place him. There was something about his face, the angle of the jaw, the eyes that didn't blink enough. Not Isaac. He was gone. Everyone knew that. But this boy wasn't a stranger either. She was mine, he said, more to Tessie than to anyone else. Before they told me I couldn't come back here, before we stopped. His throat moved like he was swallowing something thick and dry. Garcia took a breath, steady but cautious. You're Isaac's brother, aren't you? The boy's gaze flicked toward her, just for a second. Twin, he said. I'm Eli. She hadn't known Isaac had a twin. Nobody had. He wasn't in the school records, wasn't in the yearbooks, maybe transferred, maybe hidden away by grief-struck parents who couldn't face seeing a ghost in their own home. She used to sleep in our room, Eli said softly. After he died, she disappeared. Just vanished. My mom thought she ran off to die, but I always knew she went looking for him. Garcia felt the breath catch in her throat. The pieces started falling into place, each one heavier than the last. She waited. Eli continued, kneeling beside the dog now. All this time, Tessie leaned her head against his knee, and the sound that escaped her was so quiet and raw, it didn't sound like a whimper. It sounded like a memory breaking open. Behind them, thunder rolled again. Garcia looked toward the court, then at the empty halls beyond. The school was dead. But Tessie had refused to believe it. She'd clung to the last place Isaac had been real, guarding the echo of a locker in the box no one remembered to retrieve, or maybe no one wanted to. You said no one could open that room, she murmured to Miguel. What if it wasn't just locked? Miguel didn't answer. He was watching the boy and the dog like he'd stumbled into a dream too fragile to disturb. Need to call the district, Garcia whispered, mostly to herself. They can't bulldoze this place yet. Eli looked up at her, something like fear flickering across his face. They're tearing it down, next month. He laid a hand over Tessie's shoulder. Then I need to take her home. Garcia nodded slowly. The rain began to fall again, soft at first, like a curtain being drawn. They stood together in the stillness, a boy half lost to history, a dog who waited years for a moment no one else believed would come, and a school about to vanish into concrete dust. Inside Garcia's hand, the crayon drawing pressed against her palm like a heartbeat. Tessie had never really been lost. She had simply stayed behind, until someone remembered to come back for the rest of the story. The rain never let up that evening. It softened the cracked pavement and made the basketball court shine like wet stone. The world felt slower, quieter, like the school itself was listening. Eli walked the perimeter once, Tessie beside him, her steps labored but steady. She didn't look back at the gym. She didn't need to. Whatever she'd come for, whatever had held her here so long, it had passed through her like wind through tall grass. The weight had lifted. Garcia watched from the old front steps, arms folded across her raincoat. She wasn't sure what moved her more, the boy who had returned from silence, or the dog who had waited without ever knowing if waiting would matter. She had stayed not for certainty, but for hope. Miguel stood nearby, wordless as ever. But before Tessie reached the edge of the fence, he took a slow step forward and pulled something from his pocket. A key, long, rusted, forgotten. He handed it to Eli. For locker 12, he said. Eli stared at it, fingers curling around the cool metal. I don't think it belongs to the school anymore, he said quietly. I think it belongs to her. He turned to Tessie. The dog had stopped, eyes on the gate. The whistle still hung from her collar now, the old red one from the box. Garcia had slipped it there earlier, without words, like returning a piece of her back to herself. They left together. One boy, one old dog, crossing the broken sidewalk. Under the falling rain, no parade, no goodbye signs, just footsteps disappearing into the gray. Garcia didn't say a word as they vanished down the hill. But when she turned toward the court one last time, she noticed something new. That puddle where Tessie had always laid. It hadn't filled with water, just a circle of dry ground, as if something had been holding space there all along. And now, finally, it didn't need to anymore.